Nicholas "Nick" Aldis is an English professional wrestler signed to Global Force Wrestling competing under his real name. He is currently the GFW Global Champion in his first reign. He is a two-time world champion, having held both the TNA World Heavyweight Championship one time and the GFW Global Championship one time. He is known for working for the American professional wrestling promotion Total Nonstop Action Wrestling under the ring name Magnus, where he is a former one-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion, two-time TNA World Tag Team Champion and one-time IWGP Tag Team Champion. In professional wrestling, he is the third English World Heavyweight Champion in history after Gary Steele with the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in 1999 and Nigel McGuiness with the ROH World Championship in 2007, although TNA recognizes him as the first. Aldis also appeared on the United Kingdom revival of Gladiators, where he was known by the name Oblivion. Aldis, working under his real name, is also a co-presenter of Britain's Strongest Man on Challenge TV in the United Kingdom. Professional wrestling career. Early career. After becoming proficient in swimming and tennis, Aldis began bodybuilding, which ultimately led to his training to be a professional wrestler. After beginning his training at the age of 16, he made his professional debut in 2005 where he competed against Doug Williams in a highly contested 2 out of 3 falls match, which Aldis lost 2 falls to 1. Early title matches included a DAM Promotions event where he teamed up with Bash to take on the DAM Tag Team Champions Big Dave and the Bulk for the titles, and he also went up against Ash for the LDN Championship at Summit Wrestling. He would lose both matches. In 2007 he would face the WAW British Heavyweight Champion Brett Meadows for the title and lost. His last match before joining Total Nonstop Action Wrestling was a win against Marty Scurll. During his time in England he wrestled primarily at joint promotions, All-Star Wrestling and World Association of Wrestling. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling Modern-day Gladiator. In November 2008, Aldis signed with Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. On December 11, 2008 episode of Impact, TNA started airing vignettes of Aldis' debut under the name Brutus Magnus, a modern-day gladiator. Aldis competed under his Brutus Magnus name and gimmick at the TNA Maximum Impact Tour in Glasgow, Scotland on January 22, 2009, where he defeated Matt Morgan. 2 days later on the last night of the tour, Magnus defeated Sheikh Abdul Bashir in London at the Wembley Arena. On January 29 episode of Impact, another vignette of Magnus was played and it stated that Magnus' debut would occur next week. He debuted on February 5 episode of Impact as a villainous character, defeating Sharkboy with his finishing move, the Tormentum. After the match, he issued an open challenge to anyone on the TNA roster. Chris Sabin answered the open challenge at Against All Odds, which Magnus also won. This continued with another victory against Eric Young at Destination X. British Invasion and London Brawling. On April 30, 2009 episode of Impact, Magnus dropped the Gladiator character and formed a villainous group called the British Invasion with fellow British wrestlers Douglas Williams and Rob Terry. In their debut match as a team, Williams and Magnus defeated Homicide in a 2-on-1 handicap match after assaulting his tag team partner Hernandez backstage prior to the match, and stealing his Feast or Fire briefcase. The Invasion has since formed an alliance called World Elite with Eric Young, Sheikh Abdul Bashir and Kiyoshi and engaged in a feud with Team 3D over the IWGP Tag Team Championship. On July 30 episode of Impact, Magnus and Williams won the IWGP Tag Team Championship by defeating Team 3D in a tables match. However, New Japan Pro Wrestling later stated that as the title change did not occur with the sanction of the promotion, they still recognized Team 3D as the official champions. On August 10, 2009, NJPW formally recognized the title switch. At Bound for Glory the British Invasion lost the IWGP Tag Team titles back to Team 3D, but managed to win the TNA World Tag Team Championship in a 4-way Full Metal Mayhem Tag Team match against Booker T and Scott Steiner, Team 3D and Beer Money, Incorporated. The following month at Turning Point, Magnus and Williams successfully defended the title in a three-way match against Beer Money and the Motor City Machine Guns. At Final Resolution they were once again able to retain their title in a match against Shelley and Sabin. At Genesis the British Invasion lost the TNA World Tag Team titles to Matt Morgan and Hernandez. Afterwards, Magnus and Williams began abusing Terry and blaming him for their losses. On February 18, 2010 episode of Impact, Terry finally grew tired of this and attacked Magnus, thus ending his alliance with the British Invasion and completing his face turn. At Destination X 2010, Brutus Magnus announced that from now on he would be known only by the name Magnus. He then went on to lose to his former mate and wrestling partner Rob Terry in a match for the Global Championship. After not being seen for over 3 months, Magnus returned on June 14 at the tapings of Explosion, defeating Suicide and afterward challenging Rob Terry to a rematch for the Global Championship. The rematch took place at June 29 tapings of Explosion, with Terry retaining his Global Championship. On July 3, 2010, Dixie Carter announced that Aldis had signed a new longer Euro-term contract with TNA. On the edition of July 14, 2010 of TNA Today, Aldis debuted a new ladies' man gimmick. He then went on to form a tag team with Desmond Wolfe, with the two of them defeating Amazing Red and Suicide in their first match together at July 13 tapings of Explosion. At the 26th and 27th July tapings of Explosion, Magnus and Wolfe defeated the teams of Hernandez and Rob Terry and Inc. Incorporated in a 4-tag team tournament to earn the right to challenge for the TNA World Tag Team Championship. On August 26 episode of Impact, the tag team of Magnus and Wolfe was named London Brawling. They were scheduled to receive their shot at the Motor City Machine Guns and the TNA World Tag Team Championship at No Surrender, but were at the last minute pulled from the event, with TNA citing a personal issue as the reason. It was later reported that Wolfe had been sidelined due to an undisclosed medical situation. Magnus returned to working live events on September 30. On December 16 Magnus made his first appearance on Impact. In 3 months, when he met his former tag team partner Douglas Williams and informed him that Wolfe was close to a comeback. On December 30 episode of Impact, Magnus offered to team up with Williams in a tag team match, where they were defeated by Fortune members AJ Styles and Rob Terry. Magnus reappeared as a heel on February 24, 2011 episode of Impact, in a match, where he was defeated by Crimson. On March 31 episode of Impact, Magnus and Douglas Williams officially reformed the British Invasion once again as a heel group by attacking the team of Eric Young and Orlando Jordan. In their first match back together, Magnus and Williams were defeated by Inc. Incorporated on April 12, on Explosion. On April 17 at Lockdown, Magnus and Williams were defeated again by Inc. Incorporated in a 4-tag team number 1 contenders steel cage match. Despite not having won a match since their reformation, the British Invasion received a TNA World Tag Team Championship match at Slammiversary 9, which they lost to James Storm and Alex Shelley. On June 30, Magnus and Williams turned face by responding to Mexican America's bad remarks by praising the United States. They were then attacked until Rob Terry returned to save them, effectively adding him back to the group. On July 14 episode of Impact Wrestling, Mexican America's Anarquia and Hernandez defeated Magnus and Williams in a TNA World Tag Team Championship number 1 contenders match, following outside interference from their stablemate Rossiter. At August 9 tapings of Explosion, Magnus defeated Alex Shelley in the finals of a 16-man Explosion Championship Challenge tournament to earn the right to challenge for the title of his choosing. In December Magnus took part in TNA's India project, Ring Car King, defeating Matt Morgan to become the heavyweight champion. Teaming and feuding with Samoa Joe, at the start of 2012, Magnus began teaming up with Samoa Joe to take part in the Wild Card tournament. On January 5, 2012 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus and Samoa Joe defeated AJ Styles and Kazarian to win the 4-week-long Wild Card tournament and become the number 1 contenders to the TNA World Tag Team Championship. 3 days later at Genesis, Magnus and Joe failed to capture the TNA World Tag Team Championship from Crimson and Matt Morgan. Despite the loss, Magnus and Joe remained together as a tag team, attacking Crimson and Morgan in the next 2 episodes of Impact Wrestling. On February 2, Magnus and Joe defeated Crimson and Morgan in a non-title match to earn another shot at the TNA World Tag Team Championship, and at Against All Odds, Magnus and Joe defeated Crimson and Morgan to win the TNA World Tag Team Championship. Magnus and Joe then defeated Crimson and Morgan in 2 rematches in February and March and Mexican America in March to retain the championship. On April 15 at Lockdown, Magnus and Joe defeated the Motor City Machine Guns in a steel cage match to retain the TNA World Tag Team Championship. During the first open fight night on April 26, Magnus and Joe successfully defended the TNA World Tag Team Championship against the team of Jeff Hardy and Mr. Anderson, after which they were attacked by Christopher Daniels and Kazarian, who had asked for a title shot earlier in the event. On May 13 at Sacrifice, Magnus and Joe lost the TNA World Tag Team Championship to Daniels and Kazarian. On June 14 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus entered the 2012 Bound for Glory series, taking part in the opening gauntlet match, from which he was eliminated by Samoa Joe. Magnus' participation in the tournament ended on August 16 episode of Impact Wrestling, when he was defeated by Joe in a singles match, leaving him outside a spot in the semi-finals. On October 14 at Bound for Glory, Magnus unsuccessfully challenged Joe for his TNA Television Championship. On November 1 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus challenged Joe to a rematch as part of the open fight night, however, he lost the match via disqualification, after hitting Joe with a wrench. The rivalry culminated in a no-disqualification match on November 11 at Turning Point, where Magnus was again unsuccessful in winning the title. On the following episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus was sidelined with a storyline injury after he was ambushed by the Aces and Eights and hit in both his knees with a ball-peen hammer. New Main Event Mafia. At the end of 2012, Magnus returned as a face on January 31, 2013 episode of Impact Wrestling in Manchester, England, interrupting and attacking Bad Influence who were insulting the country. Afterwards, Magnus wrestled his return match, defeating TNA Television Champion Devon in a non-title match via disqualification after interference from the Aces and Eights. At Lockdown in March, Team TNA, consisting of Magnus, Eric Young, James Storm, Samoa Joe, and Sting defeated Aces and Eights, consisting of Devon, DOC, Garrett Biscoff, Nux, and Mr. Anderson in a lethal lockdown match. On March 21 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus was defeated by Jeff Hardy in a 4-way number 1 contenders match for the World Heavyweight Championship, which also included Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe. On April 18 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus was scheduled to face Devon for his television championship, however, was attacked by DOC and Nux before the match could start. Magnus returned on the 9th May episode of Impact Wrestling, defeating DOC after an inadvertent distraction from D'Lo Brown. Later that night, Magnus was again attacked by the Aces and Eights. At Slammiversary 11, Magnus teamed with Jeff Hardy and Samoa Joe in a winning effort against Aces and Eights. On June 13 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus defeated Kenny King, Matt Morgan, and Rob Terry in a 4-way match to qualify for the 2013 Bound for Glory series. The following week, Magnus defeated Kazarian in his first Bound for Glory series match via submission to earn 10 points and take an early lead in the tournament. On July 4 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus was named the 4th member of the newly reformed Main Event Mafia along with Kurt Angle, Sting, and former tag team partner and rival Samoa Joe. On September 12 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus defeated Rude in a Bound for Glory series Final 4 match to advance before ultimately losing to AJ Styles in the finals. After the Bound for Glory series, Magnus began a feud with Bad Influence, who assaulted him during the finals, and first challenged them to a 6-man tag team match against himself, Sting and Samoa Joe. Prior to the match Bad Influence incapacitated Magnus and injured his knee, but Sting and Joe emerged victorious. In the aftermath, Magnus announced he was going to take on all three members of Bad Influence himself in a gauntlet match. During the gauntlet, Magnus defeated Kazarian and Christopher Daniels, but was defeated by Bobby Roode, who took advantage of his injured knee and made him submit. After the match, Magnus began venting his frustrations around the ring before Sting came out to calm him down, which culminated in Sting offering Magnus a match against him at Bound for Glory, which Magnus accepted. Magnus defeated Sting at Bound for Glory after Sting tapped out to the King's Lynn Cloverleaf. TNA World Heavyweight Champion. On November 21, 2013 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus was entered into a tournament to crown a new TNA World Heavyweight Champion after the title was vacated. He defeated Samoa Joe in a Falls Count Anywhere match at Turning Point and Kurt Angle on Impact Wrestling to advance to the finals. He defeated Jeff Hardy in a Dixieland match to become the new TNA World Heavyweight Champion on December 3. The match aired on December 19, on Impact Wrestling, Final Resolution. In the process turned heel, he joined Team Dixie, allying himself with Dixie Carter, Rockstar Spud, and Ethan Carter III. Styles returned on the edition of January 2, 2014 of Impact Wrestling, still claiming to be the legitimate champion as he was never defeated for the title. He then lost to Magnus due to TNA President Dixie Carter directing a heavy amount of interference against Styles, making Magnus undisputed champion. Samoa Joe then stepped up to challenge Magnus, labeling him a paper champion. On January 9, 2014 episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus defeated AJ Styles in a no disqualification title unification match, after Styles had returned to TNA with his own TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Styles left TNA after the match. The next week, Magnus defeated Sting in a no disqualification title match to end Sting's TNA career. On the edition of January 30 of Impact Wrestling, Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle defeated Magnus and Ethan Carter III in a stipulated tag match. In the match, Joe forced Magnus to tap out, and as a result of the stipulation put in place, he would receive a shot at the world title. On March 2, Magnus successfully defended the TNA World Heavyweight Championship in Tokyo, Japan, defeating Kai at Wrestle 1's Kaizen Outbreak event. At Lockdown, Magnus defended his TNA World Heavyweight Championship against Samoa Joe. On April 3, Magnus successfully defended his TNA World Heavyweight Championship against Samoa Joe, Eric Young and Abyss. On April 8, part of TNA Impact 365, Director of Wrestling Operations MVP announced a 10-man gauntlet match that took place on April 10 episode of Impact Wrestling, where the winner receives a future TNA World Heavyweight title shot at Sacrifice. The match would later be won by Eric Young, who requested to have his shot at the same night, where he went to defeat the champion Magnus. Magnus will invoke his rematch clause at Sacrifice, and wrestle Young for the title. Teaming and feuding with Bram, shortly after his loss to Eric Young, Magnus began a losing streak. After losing out on a #1 contender's spot for the championship, Magnus was met in a backstage segment by his childhood friend and fellow Brit Bram, who began to chastise him, claiming he had gone soft. Over the next several weeks, Magnus began showing signs of a face turn when Bram would throw weapons into the ring and encourage him to let out a more intense side, but Magnus would refuse. More signs began to show from Magnus when he first attacked Bram in a backstage segment, and then when Magnus saved Tigre Uno from an assault from Bram the following week. On the edition of June 5 of Impact Wrestling, it looked as though Magnus would finalize his face turn and save Willow from Bram, but would in fact remain heel and attack Willow himself with a steel pry bar. Since developing a more violent persona, Magnus and Bram began a rivalry with Willow and the returning Abyss. Magnus defeated Willow on June 15, 2014, at Slammiversary 12. On June 26, 2014, episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus and Bram defeated Willow and Abyss in a Tag Team Monsters Ball match. On August 20, 2014, at Hardcore Justice, Magnus was a participant in a 6 Sides of Steel match to determine a #1 contender for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. The match was ultimately won by Eric Young and Bobby Roode. On January 23, 2015, episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus competed in the Feast or Fired match, grabbing the final case, which contained a TNA World Tag Team Championship title opportunity, in which Bram claimed to have been the one to obtain it for himself, but the chance was stolen from Magnus. On January 30th, episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus tried to reconcile with Bram in a bar, but after leaving the bar he was then viciously attacked by Bram. This act turned Magnus face once again. The following week Mickie James returned to TNA to confront Bram, who threatened Mickie in return. The week after, Magnus returned and attacked Bram in retaliation for threatening Mickie. This would lead to a match between the two, which Magnus won by disqualification after Magnus was strapped to the ropes, after which Mickie ran down to the ring and was grabbed by Bram, who forced Magnus to kiss his boot, to which he obliged. Magnus would get redemption and attack Bram backstage. This would lead to a no disqualification match between the two, which Magnus won to end the feud. Feud with James Storm. Magnus would enter into a storyline with James Storm, who intervened in his final match with Bram by saving Mickie James from being attacked. On the edition of April 24 of Impact Wrestling, Magnus and Mickie James both came down to the ring to announce Mickie's retirement from professional wrestling to focus on raising their son, but were interrupted by Storm, who managed to convince her not to. Magnus was later approached backstage by Davey Richards, who warned Magnus not to trust Storm, after which Magnus asked a member of the camera crew to follow Mickie around to keep an eye on her. After consulting the footage the crew gathered, Magnus confronted Storm and warned him to stay out of his and Mickie's business. The following week the two would have another confrontation where Storm would push Magnus too far and provoked him to attack Storm with a guitar, officially igniting their feud. The following week Magnus called out Storm for a fight, to instead be met by former rival and Storm's Revolution teammate Abyss and eventually the rest of the Revolution members Manik and Koala. At Slammiversary 13, Magnus faced James Storm in a losing effort. On July 29, episode of Impact Wrestling, Magnus and Mickie James defeated James Storm and Serena in a mixed tag match. Pro Wrestling Noah on July 22, 2012. Magnus made his debut for the Japanese Pro Wrestling Noah promotion, when he and Samoa Joe defeated Akitoshi Saito and Jun Akiyama to win the GHC Tag Team Championship. On October 8, Magnus and Joe lost the title to Kenta and Maybach Taniguchi in their first defense. Global Force Wrestling on June 29, 2015, it was announced that Aldis had signed with Global Force Wrestling, and will compete under his real name. On October 23 at Global Force Wrestling's TV tapings, Aldis became the first ever GFW Global Champion. Personal life: Aldis is engaged to fellow professional wrestler Mickie James. Their first child, a boy named Donovan Patrick Aldis, was born on September 25, 2014. Filmography: in wrestling. Finishing moves: diving elbow drop Euro 2011 Euro present, King's Lynn Clover Leaf Euro 2012 Euro present, MDD Euro Mag Daddy Driver Euro 2010 Euro 2014, Spine Shaker Euro 2014 Euro present, Tormentum/Twisting Samoan Drop Euro 2008 Euro 2009. Signature moves: double powerbomb, European uppercut, falling powerbomb, Judo clutch Euro 2013, rebound clothesline, scoop lift transitioned into a vertical suplex, slingshot elbow drop. With Samoa Joe, double team finishing moves, snapmare followed by a diving elbow drop. With Desmond Wolfe, double team finishing moves, double decker, running knee lift/sidewalk slam combination. Managers: Rob Terry, Chelsea. Nicknames: The Big O, The Modern Day Gladiator, The Mag Daddy, Magnus. Entrance themes: The British Invasion by Dale Oliver, versus The World by Under the Influence. Championships and accomplishments: Global Force Wrestling, GFW Global Championship, GFW Global Championship Tournament. Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Most Improved Wrestler of the Year, PWI ranked him number 8 of the top 500 singles wrestlers in the PWI 500 in 2014. Pro Wrestling Noah, GHC Tag Team Championship a Euro with Samoa Joe. Ring Car King, RKK World Heavyweight Championship. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, IWGP Tag Team Championship a Euro with Doug Williams, TNA World Heavyweight Championship, TNA World Tag Team Championship a Euro with Doug Williams and Samoa Joe, TNA World Tag Team Championship No. 1 Contenders Tournament a Euro with Desmond Wolfe, Wild Card Tournament a Euro with Samoa Joe, Explosion Championship Challenge, TNA World Heavyweight Championship Tournament, Feast or Fired, Global Impact Tournament a Euro with Team International. References. External links. Official website, TNA profile, Magnus at the Internet Movie Database.